let's start with the front page of the Australian, Kristy. And look, the big news, the PM on the world stage, looking very almost presidential, I think, as we watched him go into number 10 today. Australia, the first nation to secure a post-Brexit free trade deal with the UK. At the joint presser, the British Prime Minister raised concerns with China's global conduct, said he was hopeful his country could be a more significant trading partner with Australia, given the scale of the trade relationship with Beijing. We've seen the West Australian Premier, Mark McGowan, pushing back on that. What did you make of Scott Morrison and this signing of the free trade agreement, this historic moment?
This is fantastic news for Australia. It's a fantastic position for the PM to be invited to the G7 to really action something as a participant. The UK is our second source of foreign direct investment into Australia after the US. Everybody thinks it's China and China's buying Australia, but it is our main allies, the US and the UK, who remain our highest sources of direct investment. Australia was a significant trading partner to the UK before it moved to the European community in 1973. So it's actually wonderful that it's come full circle, 50 years later. Dan Tehan, the Trade Minister, he's a country boy from Gippsland in Western Victoria, so he will know what this means for Australian farmers.
On the figures, Boris Johnson said, I looked at the numbers. He said, I think something like $175 billion is Australia's trade with China. That would be backwards and forwards. He said, I think Australia's trade with the UK is currently in the order of $15 billion. He's talking about the difference in scale and says he wants to raise that second figure, the UK trade, substantially, he says, as a result of what we're doing. Now, later on, we'll get to some of the criticism that the G7 leaders and the others have had, given that the UK has extended their lockdown. It was going to be June 21. They're pushing it out to July 19. And there's been a bit of do as we say, not as we do.
Yeah, there has been, hasn't there?
People don't like that. Greg Sheridan writes that the Australia Free Trade Agreement is a triumph for Scott Morrison and Boris Johnson. He says the British Prime Minister says he's impressed by Australia's climate change ambition. He even says Morrison has committed to net zero emissions by 2050. Somebody seems to have misunderstood something there, says Greg Sheridan, or is there creative ambiguity in the Australian position? He said Morrison's commitment is zero emissions as soon as possible. He says, anyway, a bit of fudge is forgivable in an area in which fudge abounds everywhere. Now, I have noticed Boris Johnson is very green. I was in the UK last year just before the... well, actually, just towards the end of February and into March.
When you could last go.
When you could last go. And certainly his new wife is very, very environmentally conscious. And they're talking about electric cars in London and the whole bit. How important is the messaging there for Scott Morrison on the world stage, then coming home?
Look, I think the Prime Minister makes a point that this is a domestic issue for Australia. The UK has... not really its whole economy dependent on commodities mining, such as we do. So our domestic concerns, primary concern of the Prime Minister, of course he has to get along in the world stage with other global markets and have a position, but the UK Prime Minister knows full well that we will take a position to Glasgow in November, and that is probably where we'll have some more clarity what we're going to do in terms of working with the UK on that position.
Kristy, how important do you think it is domestically to see our Prime Minister? We're not a member of the G7, Australia. How important is it to see the Prime Minister on the world stage? I know James Morrow has detailed this in today's Daily Telegraph. And there are some people saying, hang on, I've been vaccinated, I still can't go and see my kids. Does it play out well generally, or is it a fine line?
I think Australians are proud that our Prime Minister gets invited to the G7. I agree with you with the do as I say, not as I do in terms of the not wearing masks and things. But on an overall scope of things, we should be proud that our Prime Minister gets invited, that he gets to have meetings, private meetings with President Biden and Prime Minister Johnson and himself. Of course, our allies in the region look to Australia as being really, really important around defence and geopolitical defence positioning, and against the narrative that the global leaders are trying to push around China. We are so important to that because of the trade, but also because of our position out here in the middle of the South China Sea.